Welcome to another Maintenance Monday. Thanks for joining me for part 2 of our batteries discussion. And last time I attempted to give you guys kind of an overview of batteries, the different types, their characteristics. And this week, again, we're kind of at the think tank table. I don't know what to call it other than that. Okay, so this week we're talking about picking the type of battery for the RVing that you're going to do. And I'm going to ask you some of the questions that I would ask some of the clients that would come in wanting battery upgrades or changes to their battery operating systems within their coach. So I'm just going to go through and fire off these questions, and you guys feel free to pause the video and discuss it amongst the other people who you RV with and see what they all say. I like to pose these questions to people just because it kind of broadens your horizons on what you could do with your RV. And if you're okay with the simplistic stuff and you just want to keep it simple, that's fine too. But it doesn't hurt to think about these questions. All right, so let me fire off with the first one. What type of camping do you do in your RV? That's really important because if you're hooked up to the power, then it doesn't matter. You can do whatever you need to do. And it doesn't really impact you. You can have a cheap battery, cheap systems, because you're relying mostly on the 120 volt power pole that you're plugged into. Next part of that is, do you run a generator a lot? If you go off grid, do you have, self-sustaining? Do you have a generator on board? Do you carry little suitcase generators, portable generators? Is that the type? Well, that's almost like being plugged in, so you really don't have to have a whole lot of battery power and high-end battery hookups. So, but if you happen to lose your generator, the question you have to ask yourself is my battery sufficient? So, is it sufficient enough to be able to handle all the systems that you would want to run on your RV if you were off-grid? Mooch docking. A lot of people that's becoming popular now, more popular. Mooch docking is, plugging into a 20 amp outlet or something thereof at a friend's house, family member's house, and you stay there and you kind of siphon off a little bit of electric to charge to run a few systems. Boondocking, of course, is completely unhooked. Usually it's going to be consisting of either full battery power, solar backup charging, and or running a generator at the same time. Next question would be, do you camp with wanting all the comforts of home? If you camp with wanting all the comforts of home, basically you've got your residential refrigerator, really good air conditioning, making sure you got your TV, you want to camp down south when it's Super Bowl weekend, do you want the big screen to be running? That's the type of thing. If you're off grid, you may not have that. So, something to think about. What do you like doing when you're camping? You like all the creature comforts. Next question I ask people is, what would you like to function while you're camping? Obviously, we need a refrigerator to function. So if you have a camp fridge, an RV refrigerator style, which is like a 2-way or 3-way fridge, a 12 volt compressor fridge, or a residential fridge, you need to know what type of battery hookup you need for that specific purpose. Water heaters, TVs, heat, AC, do you want all those things to work? And how you get them to work on battery power is a little tricky, but there are ways of doing it. Lights. All your interior lights. Like right now, I'm filming and it's, late at night, the sun's gone down, and I've got lights lighting up in here. All my lights are LEDs, so they don't draw a lot. But do you have the old, incandescent style bulbs? That really kind of takes a toll on your battery usage, sucks more power. So those are things, just a few samples of, things that you'd want to be paying attention to. Next question, are you okay with minimizing your power usage while camping, or is this a deal breaker? Now, this usually gets a lot of people into fights a lot. When I ask this question, you'll have one person in the team of campers that wants to go off grid and be out in nature, and then you got another guy or gal that wants to be hooked up to all the creature comforts and have everything operating. So usually when I tailor a battery setup or a setup for them to go off grid, it allows one person to feel like they're off grid and be in nature, and the other person to have all the creature comforts. So the last question I ask people is, do you plan on using or needing an inverter? Now, we're not going to go into the ins and outs of what an inverter is and how it works and how it operates. I'll simply put it like this. It takes 12 volt power from a battery, it inverts it and turns it into something bigger, which is your 120 volts. It then allows you to be able to run everything in the 120 volt spectrum: residential refrigerators, microwaves, coffee makers, things like that, outlets, anything that you would plug into an outlet. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so understanding how systems interact with each other is so important because everything is intertwined. So like, for instance, if you have an inverter pulling off your batteries to run certain 120 volt systems being off grid, then you can't take that offline and expect everything to run because you are depending on that. So that's important, that in making a battery selection in what you do and how you're going to do things off grid, you need to understand what is operating within that. And I say they all intertwine, they all kind of come together, and they all kind of like mesh. And if you take one system out, then everything else fails. Or if you take one system offline, then you can't supply the power you need for everything else. I know this sounds confusing. Just stay with me, bear with me here, and we'll try to give you some more clarity. Understanding the math behind it is important, okay? But before we get into the math, let me talk about a couple of options that you may want to consider. Okay, first off, before you decide what type of battery bank you want to put in and how you want to set up your battery bank and what you want to do with your RV, okay, all of those questions need to be answered before you start spending money. This is very expensive upgrades. Your batteries, at the cheapest end, you're talking $100 a battery. At the high end, you're talking $1,000 a battery. So, and even the inverters, as cheap as $600-700 for a decent inverter, and now you're talking upwards up to $2, $3, $4 for an inverter. What you're trying to do with your coach needs to be laid out and planned out first. And if you're not a planner, then I feel sorry for you, because you really need to plan this out. If you just want to wing it and hope for the best, unless you're independently wealthy, I would highly recommend not doing that. So at least take some time and plan it out. So important. I am a risk taker, a randomness person, and I just go for it. And it's got me in trouble so many times. So trust me, from one random person to another random person, and how you think and act and operate, just you need to plan it out. So a couple of things that you can do to kind of help gauge on what your coach is actually doing. So first and foremost, I'll put it up on the screen, and we'll show you basically a photo of what my system looks like through my Power Watchdog. And the cool part about that is the Power Watchdog actually gives you the option to see your volts coming in. If you only have a single line 30 amp, then it shows you what one line's coming in. If you have a 50, it shows you both lines, so line 1 and line 2. It will also tell you what your watts used and your amps on each line are being used, and then it calculates your total accumulative kilowatt hours, so that way you can kind of keep track of all of that. So what I recommend doing, if you don't have a Power Watchdog surge protector, surge guard, that's fine. There's other ways of knowing what's coming in, what's being used, but you need to gauge that somehow. So go stay at an RV park, plug in with whatever power you have, 30, 50 amp, and then run all of your systems and see how much you're really drawing. If you have 2 air conditioners, run 2 air conditioners. If you have a residential fridge, run the res fridge. Run all of your systems and see where you're at. even if you don't plan on upgrading your systems, it's a good product to have because it connects to your phone Bluetooth, okay? Or it connects to your phone via Bluetooth. And it gives you kind of a real-time view into what's going on. So a lot of people ask me, why do I keep blowing breakers? Well, because you're trying to run too many systems within the coach. So even if you're not upgrading your coach's batteries or your battery system, this is a perfect way. Just, it's inexpensive. Even on the cheap end, you're looking at a 30 amp power Watchdog, $120, up to 160, 170 bucks for the 50 amp, for the cheapest ones. And they all have Bluetooth connectivity. So that's the nice part. Plus you get the benefit of a surge protector at the same time. But I like it because I can tell what's coming in and what's going out. I had some issues, with my own coach, and it gave me a real-time warnings on everything that was going on. I could watch all of my different parameters. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I'll put another picture up on the screen of a Renogy battery monitor. This is a 500 amp battery monitor that you can monitor the voltage going in and voltage coming out of your batteries, and this will tell you how much 12 volt power you're using. The way to do this, charge batteries up all the way, and even if you're sitting in your backyard or out by your front yard, wherever you park your RV, go out there, charge them up all the way, turn off all the 120 volt power, which would include turning off your charger, and then run systems. Turn every 12 volt system you have on board on and see what happens. See how your voltage drops. See what your amps are. See what the battery monitor tells you. Now, if you don't have a battery monitor, you can also go get a amp clamp. I talked about this through several videos that we've done for the Maintenance Mondays, and you can get Klein Tools sells them as long as it's a DC amp clamp, and I'll show you how to do this in hooking all this up in the next video, which talks about wiring and testing, but you can also test it that way. So there's lots of different ways, lots of things you can do, but I recommend doing that before you need to get all of your questions answered before you start spending hundreds or thousands of dollars setting up your coach, and then it's not going to work for what you want it to do. Okay, so let's go into some of the math here. Again, I'll put these my chicken scratch up on the screen as well, but what I want you to understand is some math terms they use in trying to figure this out. Okay, so first of all, what is a kilowatt hour? A kilowatt is 1,000 watts. Okay, so 1 kilowatt is equal to 1,000 watts. So if you have 10 kilowatt hours used, you'd have 10,000 watts used. Other thing that you need to understand is we talk about voltage in terms of volts, amps, and watts. When you think of 120 volt systems such as a microwave, we think of that in wattage because it's how they calculate it through the power companies, through watts. We don't really look at it in amps used, it's watts used. Okay, so if you want to find the wattage for something and what you're using, you can take volts times your amps, and that will equal out to the total number of watts. So if we have 120 volts, you're using 10 amps, you now should have a 1200 watts. That's how you can calculate it out. Now, it's the same concept for 12 volts, all right? But we don't think of it in watts within 12 volts. We think about it only in amps. So volts and amps. When you think about how many, when you look at a battery, it says amp hours. It doesn't say watt hours. The next thing you need to understand is the AC versus DC ratio. Now, AC voltage is 10 times higher than DC voltage, and it has a 10-to-1 ratio, all right? So what that means is that if you take 12 volts, in order to get 120 volts, you have to multiply by 10. Again, all of this goes into how you set your batteries up. All of this goes into how you wire your coach. All of this plays into effect of how long you can stay off grid before needing solar to charge and a generator as a backup. Your batteries may not even be able to sustain you overnight if you decided to go to like a boondocking thing, or you stayed in a Walmart parking lot, or you are a member of Harvest Host. Somewhere, somehow, you may not be able to handle it depending on what you're running in your coach. What this boils down to is you need to be able to figure out and go through and understand what is on the coach, how much the item you're running is sucking. You know, if you have 4 max air fans on your coach like I do, you can't run all of them off grid unless you have some way of charging your batteries back up. It sucks a lot of juice. You know, likewise, if you have a whole bunch of lights in your coach, here's an example. I gave, I've been working on this guy's RV, and I hit the button for the all lights on. Well, when I did that, I was trying to test the function of a battery monitoring system I had just installed. And when I flipped the light on, it went from maybe 1 amp to 24. So with every light on in this client's coach, it's 24 amps that it's sucking from his batteries. That's a lot. Whether you have lithium, whether you have regular batteries, they're going to be dead quickly if you're running every single light. But these are the types of things you need to know. You need to go and turn everything on and be able to monitor it and see what you're actually pulling and drawing out. Another example of understanding your coach and understanding what the systems do. Another client came in, I know they won't mind me sharing this. They had a problem with their converter. The converter went up on their system. They have a residential fridge running off an inverter, pulling off their batteries. They would travel 6 to 8 hours a day, and by the time they got to their campsite, they'd plug in and their batteries would be almost dead. By the time they got to the RV park, they plug in, the converter comes online, realizes the batteries are almost dead, ramps right up to the highest amp rating that it can, which is 55 amps is what they had on board, and now it's trying to charge the batteries back up, and it's working hard. The problem is now they're at night turning on lights within the coach, and now the converter is working even harder. But don't forget, the refrigerator is still working and it's still sucking off the batteries. So now you're asking more than what the converter could handle. So it fried the converter. You need to know what's on board your coach. You need to know how the systems work, and you need to know why they're doing what they're doing. Because you can't start to compound and add more on top, because eventually it's going to crush whatever it's trying to hold up underneath. All right, so I'm going to leave you there. All right, I know I've given you a lot of information. I'm trying to keep it simple, but if you need more information, then please reach out. I'd be more than happy to answer your questions for you. I'm going to leave it there. We're going to pick up next week with part 3, which is going to be about installing the batteries and installation errors and other things that you want to watch out for. So again, thank you for joining me for another Maintenance Monday. I know this is a tough topic, but just remember, breathe and enjoy the journey.